In 1839, an American named Charles Goodyear stumbled onto a discovery that would change the world. By accidentally dropping rubber mixed with sulfur onto a hot stove, he figured out how to turn sticky, useless natural latex into tough, bouncy, durable rubber. We call the process vulcanization, and it gave us car tires, the soles of your shoes, and the modern world as you know it. There's just one problem with that story. A civilization deep in the jungles of Central America had already been doing essentially the same thing, making durable, bouncing rubber about 3,000 years before Goodyear was even born. They left no patent, no factory, no fame. And rubber is just the beginning. Because the Maya invented a whole list of things so far ahead of their time that some of them weren't matched again for over 1,000 years, and a few you are still using today, probably without realizing where they came from. Let's go through them, and they only get more unbelievable as we go.
Let's start with that rubber, because it's the perfect example of how badly we've underestimated these people. The Maya, and the cultures around them, took raw latex bleeding from rubber trees and mixed it with juice from a common morning glory vine. That juice contained chemicals that did something remarkable. It cured the rubber, making it stronger and bouncier, the same fundamental trick Goodyear would discover millennia later. And here's the clever part. By changing the recipe, the proportions of latex to vine juice, they could tune the material for different jobs. More bounce for the balls in their famous ball game. More durability for the soles of their sandals. Yes, they were essentially walking around on rubber-soled shoes thousands of years before your sneakers. More flexibility for waterproofing and binding tools. They were, in effect, running materials science, engineering a substance to a specification, in an era we usually picture as primitive. When the first Europeans saw a solid rubber ball bouncing high off a stone court, some genuinely thought it was bewitched. They had simply never seen a material behave that way. The Maya had been making it for 30 centuries. Now here's an invention that sounds almost impossibly modern, and it's one we still pay companies to do for us today. Water filtration. The great Maya city of Tikal had a serious problem. It was built on porous limestone, which meant that for much of the year, during droughts, clean water was dangerously scarce. And what little they could store would turn foul with toxic algae. So at one of their major reservoirs, the Maya built a filtration system. And what they used stunned the archaeologists who found it. They used a volcanic mineral called zeolite, combined with crystalline quartz sand, to create what scientists describe as a natural molecular sieve. This mixture physically traps harmful microbes, heavy metals, and toxins, pulling them right out of the water. Here's the staggering part. Zeolite is still used in water filters today. It's modern technology, and the Maya were using it over 2,000 years ago. The oldest known water filtration system of its kind anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, more than 1,000 years before Europe figured out the same trick. Even better, the specific rock they needed wasn't local. They identified the right mineral, traced it to ridges miles away, and hauled it back specifically because it cleaned their water. That's not luck. That's engineering. And speaking of things they shouldn't have been able to do, let's look up at the sky, because the Maya were arguably the greatest naked-eye astronomers of the ancient world. With no telescopes, no lenses, nothing but their eyes, patience, and obsessive record-keeping, they tracked the heavens with a precision that is genuinely hard to believe. They calculated the length of the solar year so accurately that their figure was arguably better than the European calendar that arrived many centuries later, their estimate landing within minutes of the true value. Even more astonishing, they nailed the cycle of the planet Venus, the time it takes to return to the same point in the sky, to within about 2 hours of error, across a cycle of nearly 584 days. They mapped the motions of Mars, Jupiter, and Mercury, and they could predict eclipses years in advance. Let that sink in. A people with no metal tools, working entirely by eye, calculated the rhythm of another planet to within hours. And yes, this astronomy is what powered that whole end of the world in 2012 panic. People stockpiled food and water because one great cycle of the Maya calendar was ending that December. But everyone got it backwards. To the Maya, it was never a prediction of doom. It was just an odometer rolling over, one great cycle ending, and the next beginning. exactly like your car's mileage flipping from 99,000 to a fresh count. The apocalypse was our invention, not theirs. Now, the Maya had all these cities full of astronomers and traders and goods, and they needed to connect them. So they built something that, from the air, looks shockingly modern: a network of roads. They called them Sakbeob, white roads. And these weren't dirt paths. They were raised stone causeways built up above the ground, filled with rubble, and then coated on top with bright white limestone plaster, which, by an amazing coincidence, is essentially the same basic formula the Romans used to make their concrete. These roads ran dead straight across the landscape for kilometers, gleaming white, cutting through the jungle. The longest known one stretches for around 100 kilometers, connecting two distant cities in an almost perfectly straight line. Picture that. A brilliant white highway over 60 miles long, laid down by hand across rough terrain more than 1,000 years ago. And here's the modern twist. Many of these roads were swallowed by jungle and completely lost, until scientists started flying over the area with a laser scanning technology called LiDAR, which strips away the trees digitally and reveals the ground beneath. When they did, they found the Maya world was far more connected and far more densely built than anyone had ever imagined. Entire road networks and thousands of hidden structures lighting up the map. They built highways without the wheel and without pack animals, purely for people on foot. And they built them so well, we're still discovering them today. Okay, now we move into the middle of our list, the inventions that are a little more expected from a great civilization, but no less impressive when you actually look. Start with the engine that made all that astronomy possible, an idea so simple you'd never guess it was revolutionary: the number 0. This sounds too basic to be a big deal, but 0 is a genuinely strange concept. It's a symbol for nothing, for the absence of a quantity. And treating nothing as a real number you can write down and calculate with was one of the hardest leaps in the entire history of human thought. The mighty Romans, for all their engineering, never had a true 0, which is part of why, if you try to multiply with Roman numerals, you'll quickly lose your mind. The Maya, on the other hand, were using a fully developed 0 by around the 4th century, and they did it completely independently, an ocean away from any culture in the old world that had the idea. They wrote it as a little shell-shaped glyph, and it wasn't decoration. It was the keystone that let them write gigantic numbers and track time across millions of years. Without 0, none of their calendar math would have been possible. That math was written down, which brings us to the next one, something modern scholars took an absurdly long time to even understand: the Maya script, the most sophisticated writing system in the entire ancient Americas. For the longest time, Europeans completely misread it. They assumed the little picture-like symbols were a simple alphabet, one symbol per letter, and so every attempt to read it failed for centuries. The breakthrough came largely from a Russian scholar named Yuri Knorozov, working in the Soviet Union in the 1950s, who had never even set foot in Mexico. Studying copies of the few surviving Maya books, he cracked the secret. It wasn't an alphabet at all. It was phonetic and syllabic. Each glyph mostly stood for a syllable, a sound, and you combined them to build words, the way you'd sound a word out loud. It was advanced enough to write down anything they could say: their history, their astronomy, the names and the deeds of their kings, their myths, and remarkably, about 80% of surviving Maya writing can now be read, which means these ancient voices are, quite literally, speaking to us again across 1,000 years. Next is one you can probably taste right now if you think about it: chocolate. The Maya were among the first to take the bitter seeds of the cacao tree, ferment them, dry them, roast them, and grind them into a drink, the direct ancestor of every chocolate bar and cup of cocoa on Earth. But to the Maya, chocolate was far more than a treat. It was sacred, used in their most important ceremonies. And here's the detail I find genuinely wild: cacao beans were used as actual money, real, functioning currency. Records show you could buy goods for a precise number of beans, a set number for a turkey, a few for a piece of fruit, a handful for a day's labor.
People literally drank their currency. And because the beans were so valuable, it created some of the earliest counterfeiters we know of. People who would carefully hollow out a cacao bean, eat the inside, and stuff the empty shell with dirt to pass it off as real. Fake money made of chocolate over 1,000 years ago. Every time you enjoy chocolate today, you're tasting something the Maya valued so highly, they spent it like gold. Now, to feed cities of tens of thousands of people in the middle of a jungle, you need serious farming. And this is another place the Maya quietly outperformed expectations. For a long time, people assumed they used only simple slash-and-burn farming, which couldn't possibly support their huge populations. But that didn't add up, and LiDAR scanning recently solved the mystery.
Across vast wetland areas, the Maya had built sprawling networks of raised fields and canals. They would dig channels to drain and control the water, piling up the rich soil into raised plots that stayed fertile and above the floodline. And the canals between them did double duty, moving water and likely farming fish and other food right alongside the crops. It was intensive, engineered agriculture designed to squeeze the maximum food out of difficult, swampy land. They were essentially terraforming the wetlands. And on hillsides, they carved terraces to stop erosion and capture soil, the same technique used by farmers around the world today. This wasn't a people scratching at the dirt and hoping. This was large-scale landscape engineering, feeding one of the densest populations of the ancient world. Here's one more from the middle of the list that's wonderfully clever: body armor. The Maya and their neighbors didn't have steel plate, but they were constantly at war and needed protection. Their solution was to take thick cotton, quilt it in layers, and, in some cases, soak it in saltwater brine so that when it dried, the salt crystals stiffened the fabric into a tough, padded vest. The result was lightweight, flexible armor that could absorb blows and stop projectiles surprisingly well. And here's the proof of how good it was. When the heavily armored Spanish arrived, sweating and roasting inside their hot, heavy steel, they took one look at this cotton armor, realized it was cooler, lighter, and perfectly effective in the tropical heat, and started wearing it themselves. The conquerors adopted the armor of the people they were fighting because it was simply better suited to the job. That's a remarkable endorsement. And now we come to the inventions I saved for the end, because these are the ones that genuinely sound impossible. We talked about their astronomy, but I didn't tell you where they did it. The Maya built actual observatories. The most famous, at Chichen Itza, is a round stone tower called El Caracol, Spanish for the snail, named for the spiral staircase winding up inside it. From a distance, with its rounded dome on a stacked base, it looks eerily like a modern observatory. And that resemblance is no accident. Its windows and sightlines are deliberately aligned with key points on the horizon: the equinoxes, the solstices, and above all, the rising and setting points of Venus, the planet the Maya were obsessed with. Astronomers studying the building found that out of dozens of significant astronomical events, the structure's surviving sightlines point precisely at a huge share of them. One researcher who studied it said something haunting, that he was certain the tower was built to track celestial events that modern Western astronomers haven't even identified. They built a stone machine for reading the sky, and we may still not fully understand everything it was designed to see. Then there's Maya medicine, which was far ahead of anything in Europe at the time. They were genuinely skilled healers. They could close wounds using surprising natural materials, including, remarkably, human hair. And they treated injuries with plant medicines, many of which modern science has since confirmed contain compounds that actually work, including natural substances with real antibacterial properties. They practiced advanced dentistry, drilling tiny holes in teeth and inlaying them with jade and other precious stones, with a fit so precise that modern dentists have studied it with admiration. But here is the part that stops people cold. For their cutting tools, the Maya used obsidian, volcanic glass. And when you flake obsidian correctly, you get an edge that is, almost unbelievably, sharper than modern surgical steel. The cutting edge can be just a few molecules thick, finer than the finest steel scalpel made today. And this isn't legend. Obsidian blades are so sharp that some modern surgeons have actually tested them in delicate procedures because they can leave a cleaner, finer result than steel. So sit with that. A civilization with no metal at all was performing careful medical work with blades sharper than the ones sitting in a modern operating room. And they made them out of glass spat up by volcanoes. And for the final one, we don't look at an object at all. We look at an entire building, because the Maya didn't just study the sky, they built it into stone. Their most famous pyramid, El Castillo at Chichen Itza, isn't just a temple. It's a giant calendar, and a piece of astronomical theater so precise it still works perfectly today, more than 1,000 years on. The structure has 4 staircases, and if you add up all of its steps and the platform on top, you get 365, one for every day of the year. But that's not the jaw-dropping part. The pyramid was engineered so that around the spring and autumn equinox, the afternoon sun strikes the stepped edges of its terraces and casts a series of triangular shadows down the side of the northern staircase. And those shadows line up perfectly with a giant carved serpent's head at the base, creating the illusion of an enormous snake of light and shadow slithering down the pyramid, connecting the sky to the earth. It's their feathered serpent god, appearing on cue, built entirely out of sunlight and stone and geometry. The Maya aligned an entire mountain of rock so precisely with the movement of the sun that more than 1,000 years after they last built it, you can still stand there on the right afternoon and watch a god descend the steps, exactly as they designed it. No metal, no telescopes, no machines, just people who looked harder at the world than we ever gave them credit for. And here's the thing the documentaries with the aliens and the vanished civilization always leave out. The Maya never disappeared at all. Over 6 million Maya are alive today, speaking their languages, living on the same land, the direct descendants of the minds that bounced the first rubber ball, carved the number 0, and taught a pyramid how to summon a serpent out of the sun.